My name is Michael Suter. This is the 11th video in my series of Diamond Seed astrology videos. This video is going to be on the phenomenon of consensus trance as described by American psychologist Charles T. Taft, or excuse me, Tart is his last name, Tart. So consensus trance, according to this psychologist, is an automated state of consciousness. Actually, the normal consciousness based on the premise that people believe what they're told to be true as opposed to what they themselves have realized to be true. So, without, we can really skewer the definition and try and get a bit more out of that. I'll spend a little bit of time doing that. But I want to also juxtapose this idea of consensus trance to some other ideas. The first one is the idea of we hear about this this sort of legendary story of when the conquistadors or other colonial forces came to the New World, that only certain spiritually awakened people were actually even able to see the large ships that arrived on the shore. That there was some sort of consensus trance among people that was redacting their ability to actually see what was right in front of their eyes. This is kind of an odd story. There's a few things about it that may be problematic. The first is that some scholars now believe that there were a lot of ships going across the sea to the Americas long before 1492 or any of these sort of arbitrary dates that we assign to colonial arrival in the New World. And they had small ships, so why can't they see big ships? That's a good question. But it's sort of a semi-reinforcing idea of our consensus trance. It's sort of a little slightly different version of that. Another thing that I'd like to juxtapose this is the work of Charles Fort, who talks about something that's kind of similar. There's reports that Charles Fort compiled over the course of a great deal of his career, in which he showed there was these reports in the media about things like frogs falling from the sky, fish falling from the sky, these very odd phenomenon that are extremely difficult to find a materialist mechanism by which these things happened. So here we have a kind of a slightly opposite idea, where people are seeing things that are outside of consensus reality, so to speak, that are very difficult to explain. Them reporting them, they're talking about these things. They're and there's literally hundreds and hundreds of these events that are documented. And then it's the establishment, scientists, so to speak, authorities, experts who say, nope, that didn't happen. That it couldn't have happened. We don't have a mechanism for that, so it didn't happen. So that's yet another thing we need to put into our into our minds. Getting back to the original definition of as presented of consensus trance, it's the word automated consciousness is sort of an oxymoron. Consciousness itself is not automated. Our lens through which we see reality can be redacted, but to start using the word automated is probably inaccurate. I would prefer to not go there, because consciousness is not a machine. We are not computers. We're not nothing about us is automated, except to the extent that our left brain wants to redact and filter, and has to filter experience in order to make sense of what's going on in this world. We have examples like woman Jill Bolte Taylor, I believe is her name, who wound up getting damage to her right brain and then was entirely functioning on her, her left brain, if I said that wrong. Her left brain received some damage, and then her right brain was, entirely controlling the show. And you can look her up to see what what her experience is. So as we get into this concept of consensus trance, we have to kind of look at brain chemistry and the two hemispheres of the brain in order to start to talk about what's actually going on. So I'm going to add a couple things to this. I would say that consensus trance, and we're using this again as a very loose. This is a metaphor, and if we start thinking that it's something other than a metaphor, we're going to get ourselves into rather deep trouble rather quickly. It's a metaphor. So it's. I would add to this that it's consensus trance is it's a collective agreement on the nature and constituency of reality. So that's in philosophical speak, we're talking about epistemology, which is what can we know, how can we know it, and ontology, what actually is, what are the actual constituents of the universe. So consensus trance. To say this does not imply that this is a consistent or logical set of ideas. It's consensus trance is usually we can, if you want to start applying the rules of logic and any kind of philosophical examination to a consensus, something that we would probably call a consensus trance. If it doesn't hold up under the laws of logic, it's we should be certainly suspect of it and be prepared to possibly jettison it or to put it into a different framework rather than being true, than being something that we've arrived at conveniently, to facilitate our being able to communicate with each other. So these things are all, this is all well and good, and these are all great questions, but what does this have to do with astrology? And it's gonna, this now brings us to a quote that I heard from another astrologer recently, which was that the goal of astrology is to transcend the chart, and that's a loose quote. And I'm not going to name this person or get too much into what exactly they said, but I'm going to, I have a certain amount of agreement with that statement in that we could think about the chart itself as being a consensus, that there, you have the archetypal planets in, which are the relatively masculine actors. They move, they wander, they're little fires in the sky, or big fires in the sky, the luminaries. And then we have the signs. So we have this dynamic relationship between a archetypal actor and its the territory in which it sits, and how it's going to present. And this idea that there's sort of potentially this could turn into a consensus. You could have a consensus trance, a kind of a lens that's created because all the planets have sort of lined up in the way that they have at the time of birth or at the time of any event. And we could use this metaphor as saying we want to break the consensus. We want to look at the consensus which they've settled into, and we want to try and make sense of that, and perhaps see if there's not a better way of looking at the world. That this may be an ossified. This may be a redacted way of looking at the world, and for most people, it probably is. And that's, I think that's kind of the one of the potential benefits of astrology. Why we would go to an astrologer in the first place is to kind of see, get a lens upon the lenses. Look at our natural tendencies as they are presented through a frozen moment in time of our birth. So when does this any metaphor is it's a metaphorical framework, and it generally falls apart at some point. My problem with this is the concept of transcendence. We're not going to ascend, we're not going to transcend, except to the extent that we understand what we are. We can't go out without going in. We can't. The transcendent principle is the masculine principle. We cannot go strictly towards the light, of transcendence, and not also direct the light at the shadows and try and understand what's there in the first place. We also need to understand that the archetypes are not black and white, and they're not set in stone in terms of their presentation. And that is the astrology is talks about transits. That these are constantly, there's a set of sets of these relationships being created and recreated, where you have the planet in the sky is transiting by conjunction or any number of angles. There's the effects of the eclipse points. There's larger cycles that go on, like in Hellenistic astrology, we have like zodiacal releasing. We have there's progressed charts that people, there's a lot of substantiation for that in terms of historically that technique being used. There's other techniques like one that's described in the PGM, which is Austin Coppock has described that as he's called it the decades technique. These are all ways of it's giving us like these lenses of sort of archetypal rulership over large stretches of life, and potentially give us information about how we will, our experience will vary in different times of our lives. So transcending that is not possible, nor really desirable. But it's the transcendence, if we want to use that in a positive way, and we should use. I'm not saying don't use transcendence. That's one of these two principles. The other principle being the feminine principle of immanence. That things. This is the cyclical nature of reality. That it's we're not actually progressing. We're simply going through cycles. That's this is that we simply are what we are. It's more like we are. We're more of an animal nature. You could go down that road of more instinctual beings, which we absolutely are. And the fact that we're talking about a consensus trance plays very much into this this goddess consciousness, this instinctual herd nature that we have, which should not be vilified wholesale. It's something that we need and want in this plane of reality. Anything that really denies this basic nature, when we get into denial of basic biological sex or these other things, these are the realms of the goddess that they're the realms that are easily, not easily necessarily, but that technocrats and behaviorists and social engineers want to convince us that this is all we are, that we're a bunch of cells bouncing together, that consciousness is a epiphenomenon of material. Of the material universe, and that consciousness is really sort of just a it's samsara. It's really nothing. It's it's just this thing that we are deluding ourselves into believing in. So speaking of delusions, the consensus trance idea also plays upon this this idea. This is in the goddess realm. The idea, the consensus is in general, like seeking consensus, collectivist kind of paradigms are very much in the more in the feminine psychological realm. Again, that's not negative. That's just something we need to understand. That aspect. It doesn't mean that women are that and men are not that or anything like that. That's just silly. This is just a more or less Hermetic way of describing these forces that we should it's a typology. We need to put it into its own place and then work with it and understand that this is not these are not constraints we put upon people. These are actually a way to lift the chains when you're using, when you understand that these are the principles by which the universe works. This is actually very empowering. So the idea that a consensus can create or substitute for reality or truth, that's that's kind of a logical step to go from what we're talking about. Consensus trance is, this is valuing the consensus, as saying that consensus in itself can, it has some sort of intrinsic value, which it doesn't. There's no value in a consensus. It can be useful for making decisions as groups sometimes, but this is where we get into the truly dangerous nature of centralized, powerful government, where we don't have really tight limitations upon what central authority and collectivist, binding, legally intrusive government can do to us, because this is never a good idea. It should be very, 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 very limited in what it can do, and this is, I think, demonstrated by the nature of consciousness and everything we're talking about. So this is consensus does not create truth. Consensus does not create any kind of there's no virtue in a consensus. And we get this, doubly dangerous idea that when there is a consensus among so-called experts, then we should absolutely just ignore whatever our experience is and just, lay down our critical thinking capacity at the feet of these so-called experts, because this, again, is like the the priest who is our intermediary between us and God. Then boy, does that open up the potential for abuse that we've seen over and over again. So our technocrats, our modern social justice warriors, are the inheritors of the priests of the Dark Ages, who are telling us that we're children, that we need to give up our masculine individuation. Emasculate ourselves before the Mother Church, which is of course, is now government, which is now the corporate and state fusion that we're increasing. The international fascist regime that we're seeing falling into place. So this is connected to the mythology of democracy. So again, this is the idea that there's something, the demos means the crowd. And I've made the comment previously that when daimon becomes demon, the crowd is invoked. So the demon, that's a sort of a etymological joke that I'm making. That the demon shows up with the crowd. The daimon is the individuating force, but you put demos in there, and it's the opposite. It's the super ego that it's the oppressive internal voice that wants us to conform to society's highly transgressive structures that basically want us to be cogs in its machine, to not make trouble, to to line up in in the Matrix, essentially, where we're just giving our energy to a increasingly alien and anti-human force, which is government, which is transhumanism and post-humanist ideals of what society should look like. The human as a inferior robot, the human as a computer that's inefficient, that's simply just needs to feed this this behemoth of collectivism. So getting back to astrology, so what is what is the role of the astrologer in all of this? So over the course of the last 3 years, we've seen astrologers who have, basically accepted the consensus trance as presented by the myth makers, the media, the governments, the massive shock and awe that we've seen of medical crisis, public health crisis. And I should mention that there is no such thing as public health. It doesn't exist. There's only individual health. And the more that we become, trained in this idea that if one person's sick, everybody's sick, that is a consensus trance in itself, that we're, the way we, this would be another video, but there's very little real science behind germ theory, and that needs to be really exposed. So this consensus trance is being formed by social engineers. It's being formed by behaviorists, people who believe that this is I mentioned the humanity is just we're just apes that have this delusion of consciousness, and we're really we're nothing. It's the Darwinist materialist evolutionary model that's completely discredited, but somehow manages to hang on in our consciousness because it's it serves the establishment. That's why materialist philosophy has not been still taught, even though it's completely useless and has been overturned logically and feels in all ways. It's been proven to be bunk, garbage, useless. It should be jettisoned, but it's a control mechanism. Because if we believe that we are just our behavior, then wow, we need behaviorists to alter us, because we're just all these terrible things are happening because our human nature is so terrible. So as astrologers, what should we do? Do we just kind of not talk about that? Do we where do we fall in this whole mess? Astrology, people have been trying to find a mechanism by which astrology works over the course of millennia. So we have people in it's the rays of the planets, it's the it's neutrinos, it's any number of physical mechanisms through which astrology works. And again, there's consciousness is primary. Material is an epiphenomenon of consciousness. It's the opposite of what people believe. And that's not to say that there's not vibration, because there obviously is. The Hermetic principles are real, and they work through matter. The doctrine of signatures, color, motion, distance, all of the the basic things. So Hermeticism, you have 7 principles according to the Kabbalion. There's more potentially, but the 7 basic ones are mentalism. Everything is consciousness, mind. We are all part of a greater, the mind of all. Then there is correspondence, which of course is as above, so below, as within, so without. Vibration, everything vibrates at a certain speed. Nothing does not vibrate, everything vibrates, even if you can't see it. Polarity, everything polarizes, heat, and all things that we measure are just on a continuum from each other. The rhythm, everything is happening in a rhythm. The cause and effect, which gets into natural law, that there is a causative consequence of any action, and this is the implication of there being a moral universe and natural law that rules creation. And gender, of course, we can see how that's being actively, undergoing an assault in this day and age. So, as astrologers, we should really be studying our Hermeticism. We should be, for astrology is if anything, astrology works on polarities. All of the zodiac is, a set of 6 polarities, 12 signs. The rulership of those signs, we have our archetypal planetary rulers, and we need to understand why, what their relationship is to ruling those signs. The signs are about the year. They're not really, we can get into an argument, sidereal astrology versus tropical. It's even, I'm not really interested in saying that one or the other is triumphant. We need to get rid of one or the other. We absolutely do not. We need to be able to work in multiple metaphorical frameworks. And sidereal works, following the idea that these real estate in the sky should be divided up according to where the fixed stars are, and that the constellations of the fixed stars are processing solely over time. So therefore, the astrology needs to, our signs, our territories, are moving with them. And tropical means, tropical says that no, this is defined by the sun's relationship to the earth and the seasons. Now, there's no reason why we can't look at both, because these are different metaphorical frameworks, and there's a great deal of value in trying to understand multiple metaphorical frameworks. I come down on the tropical is absolutely indispensable, because the rulership schemes in astrology we make hash out of them when we remove them from the actual cross of the zodiac, which is the equinoctial point and the solstitial point. We can't, if our sun becomes exalted anywhere but at the equinox, then and Saturn becomes exalted anywhere but at the fall equinox, and the opposite falls happen, or depressions where they go out of favor. That makes complete hash out of our rulership system. So we need to at the very least, if we're going to use rulership systems, we have to understand that they're absolutely linked to the seasons, because all of the keywords of the planets are seasonally based. That's really not something that I think can be successfully argued otherwise. So if we, as astrologers, if we can work towards breaking, not even breaking. I think breaking is that gets that sort of transcendent idea, but recognizing how there is a tendency within any chart to make a consensus, that we have a relationship between these archetypes. They want to, tend to, say this is how it is, and then not really, understand that each archetype exists on a continuum. They're all there functionally for a reason. So the more we, work towards having our clients understand the functions of the archetypes, that's really transcending, the consensus. That's how we break through the consensus, if you will, and understand that it's just not, it's not written in stone. We shouldn't treat the chart as something we need to then rip up and throw away once we've arrived, because we don't arrive. We don't transcend. We don't ascend. We're staying here. This is where we are, and that's a non-transcendent ideology moves us away from everything that all of our manifest destiny, all of our progressivism, all of our utopianism, all of our messianism, all of that becomes pretty suspect, and we're back to, what do we do? How do we, this is why people will fight for their consensus trance, because when it starts to threaten the very basic framework of their universe as they see it. If there's no messianism, if there's no millenarianism, if there's no progressivism, if there's if we've shown those to be just simply not the case, and quantum science is very much in favor of this idea that your particle can become a wave, and your wave can become a particle. And if you look at it really carefully, you might actually say that there is no particle, that's just sort of, these are not even things that are they're just on a polarity. They're not distinct from one another actually. Then it gets really we're talking about something it's dualism, but it's absolutely starts to really comply with Hermetic thought. So I hope that's helpful today for any astrologers or people who want to go to an astrologer, who believe in astrology. Just if you want to go to an astrologer, I would recommend that you go to somebody who has a lot of experience with understanding, done a lot of work to understand what consciousness is. These ideas about consensus trance, really helpful, I think, for astrologers to spend some time with how recognizing that our establishment lies. First of all, that's really helpful as an astrologer. Going back, probably thousands of years, it would be good to understand that the if you're interested in ancient astrology, just don't take the things they say at face value, because they're inflected by the paradigms that existed at the time that they were alive. And we can go back and look at all these things in a much better and revise them, and then say, like, we're gonna maybe even take this back further and find out why. We know why the astrology was persecuted, and we know why it became something that was compliant with more monotheistic paradigms, because it had to, it had to, or else the people would probably, their heads might roll. And people who maintain a true, very extremely traditional view would probably be working, in the king's employ, and then saying something else to the outside world, so that the common man wouldn't actually realize that they were holding on to something that had been taken away, if that makes sense. All right, that's it for today. That is our presentation on consensus trance. I can be found at michaelmsuter.com. That's my blog. I'm going to be putting up some educational material that will be available for sale soon. And my book will be out relatively soon on Venus and Virgo. All right, thank you.